St. John's United Church of Christ. Wherever you are on your faith journey, we're glad you're here worshiping with us. I'm Rev.Christie Mandas, and with me are the Reverend Todd Hackman and Cindy Blanc, our musician. We will celebrate communion today. So if you want to take a moment and go and get your wine or your grape juice and your bread, that way you'll have it ready when we celebrate communion together.
Our scripture reading today comes from the Old Testament, from the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 17. We're reading from verse 1, and then 4 through 11, 20 through 24, and 32 through 37. And this is the introduction, sets the scene, if you will, of the interaction between David and Goliath. Hear God's word for today. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Soko in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes-Dammim between Soko and Azekah. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." And on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines and facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine, champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. So David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him, for you are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear has come and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair and struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Here ends the reading of God's word for today. May it be blessed to our hearing and our understanding and our living. Amen.
May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to our Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. The story of David and Goliath is one of the most popular and well-known stories in the Bible. Aside from the fact that it tells a dramatic action story fueled by classical, virile traits of masculinity, such as forcefulness, courage, strength, military prowess, and it films well. Its timelessness, however, is due in part to something else: the human tendency to root for the one who may, against all odds, emerge victorious. There's something innately human about cheering for the underdog, to be assured that right wins over might and that ultimately justice prevails. Or to quote Martin Luther King, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Given all evidence to the contrary, people of faith hold faith to the notion that although Caesar may occupy the throne and Jesus the cross, it is Jesus who rises up to split history into BC and AD. As protests against police brutality rise up across our country, I cannot help but consider that as last week's news was exclusively about the COVID pandemic, this week the focus is on another pandemic, systemic racism, which is just as insidious and ruthless. Some Christians believe that God's plan for humanity, that we are made in God's image, cannot be thwarted. And yet we ask during pandemics, mass shootings, wars, droughts, and famines, just as the prophet Isaiah did in centuries past, "How long, O Lord, how long? How long will be under the yoke of oppressive giants, human-made or otherwise?" We just naturally hope that the Davids of the world will emerge victorious. We want the smaller, weaker opponent with a big and courageous heart for justice to win over a much bigger, more techy, and stronger tyrant. David was confronted by the appearance of the giant Goliath and all his polished armor and a 60-pound arrow, but David saw the strong man underneath Goliath's facade of power, and he calls him out. David warns Goliath about trusting in better stuff and false gods, saying, "You won't win the battle against the one who is shielded by God's power. The battle is the Lord's." Hope creates the vision, but it doesn't guarantee the victory. Because bad ideas are not destined to lose, God calls us to walk alongside, to work alongside, not only to hear, but to heed the call for an end to whatever our individual and collective oppressive giants may be. I'm struck by 1 Samuel 17:23, where it says simply, "And David heard him." David heard Goliath, the giant who was challenging the weaker identity, security, and well-being of the newly emerging Israel. Goliath taunts David, saying, "Are you not the servant of Saul?" Implying that since David served a weak king, how could he be anything but weak and cowardly himself? But David is confident because he is foremost a follower of God, and it is God who is David's true armor. So I wonder at the stronger, more powerful, and convicting voice David heard from within was actually God's voice. Because look, David was ready for the challenge with Goliath because he was a practiced follower of God. He trusted his God who had already prepared him for this battle. Recall that David protected his father's sheep, and when a lion or bear came and attacked one, David would battle for the sheep and win, not with armor, but with simple tools he had at hand. David's confidence comes from a God who promises to be with those who love him undividedly. And again, what David heard must have been powerful enough to cause him to boldly say, "Let no one's heart fail." Where did that courage come from? I think that David was listening with the ears of his heart, and that this situation touched his humanity to the degree that it connected him to something beyond himself. When has something like that happened to you? What are the giants in your life today that threaten and challenge? When have you encountered a Philistine champion who drew the lines of battle? Whose voice did you listen to? Because we also need to be careful of which voices we listen to, don't we? It could be that the ones closest to you will give you the worst advice, as is actually cautioned in this story. It was David's brother who ridiculed him and told him that he didn't belong there. It takes discernment to separate good advice from bad advice, and the courage to act once you decide to face your giants. And our giants are as real today as they were in David's day. Have you ever felt overwhelmed and overpowered by circumstances, as if you were up against something bigger and stronger than yourself? What was the giant? Have you ever felt that you were just not up to what is being asked of you? That in the shadow of the giant, you felt small and inadequate? We all face giants, Philistines in our lives. Sometimes it's personal and unique to our particular situation. Goliath might be an illness, loneliness, the death of a loved one. Maybe a failing relationship or an abusive one you're trying to get out of. Or maybe it feels as if your life is moving out of control and that you're powerless to do anything to stop it. Other times, Goliath is more systemic, but most of the time we don't notice because it's the water that we swim in and the air that we breathe. Goliath might be mass shootings in our country, violence throughout the world, war, racism, systemic cruelty, immigration. Goliath shows up in a lot of different ways. Every time Goliath shows up, the battle lines are drawn. However, the battle is not often what we think it is. Every day there are so many battle lines drawn, and they are always us versus them. Democrats versus Republicans, black versus white, Christian versus Muslim, rich versus poor, and on and on. Yet none of these are the primary battles of the day. They are only manifestations of a much deeper and more consequential battle. The primary battle for every single person that one has to address is the one for the heart, for my heart, for your heart, the heart of humanity. This battle determines who we are, how we live our lives, and what kind of ancestor we will be, and who we will ultimately serve. That's the wager that Goliath threw down to David, and David stepped up to that battle line. Goliath comes with brute strength and force. He came to David with the finest armor available at that time. Think of the weapons, though, that we have today. Bombs, all kinds of guns, intimidation, discrimination. These are also weapons. So too can ideology, policy, and law be used as weapons to hurt others. Maybe the most dangerous weapon, however, is a closed mind and a hard heart. The weapons our Goliath carries are many and varied. In the face of a giant like Goliath, the temptation will be to respond in kind, to arm ourselves weapon for weapon. But what that does is to escalate the fighting or sends it deeply underground, biding its time before the next eruption. Remember what David did when Saul offered him his armor? He takes it off. It doesn't fit him. That's not who he is. Maybe David has something new to teach us here. He removes Saul's armor and sword and steps up to do battle in the name of the Lord. To be sure, this is not about co-opting God for our side. It means opening our eyes and turning our hearts to God and to loving others as ourselves, to being peacemakers. It means we work for justice and treat all persons with human dignity, to offer compassion instead of indifference, to love our neighbor, our enemy, and the stranger. We open our arms and soften our hearts to one another. I want to be more like David, don't you? Sometimes I am, but other times I'm not. The battle between David and Goliath is a battle that rages within each and every one of us. But whether we project our David or our Goliaths into the world is up to us. You may know the story of the grandfather who teaches his grandson about life by telling him what a terrible fight is raging within him. He says, there are two wolves. One is evil and the other good. And the child asks, which one wins? The grandfather looks at him and replies, whichever one you feed. Will you feed your David or Goliath? The one you feed is the one who wins. Feed David, starve Goliath. Amen.
We gather our hearts, minds, spirits together in a time of prayer, lifting up those who particularly need our prayers in these days. I lift up these prayers of our own faith community and ask that you keep them close as you keep your own personal prayers in your heart. Our family is grieving the loss of loved ones this week, and we ask that you remember the families of Michael Isley and Rudy Rottenbuer, who each one has had their life celebrated at funeral services this week. We ask you to remember their families. Remember these folks also who are struggling with physical or other needs. Folks in hospice care include Barbara and Diana and Dorothy, and those continuing in cancer treatment in these days are Deb and Joy. And remember these folks as we come together for a moment of quiet prayer, and I'll guide us then through our pastoral prayer. Let's pray. Holy God, you created the world and all that is in it. You are the source of our strength, and we place our confidence in you. And so it is with this faith that we bring to you now all of our prayers. You, O God, are the God of earthquake and the storm. The world is full of danger and chaos right now. We are plagued by both a physical virus and a social virus. And so we pray that you heal our wounded hearts. Bring a kind of peace that passes understanding. Bring a wholeness and healing that only you can provide. Most merciful God, forgive us when we imagine that we can live without you, even though it is you who give us our every breath. Forgive us when we seek to control others, to hold over others in power rather than strive to live in unity. When we allow fear to overtake us, even though our lives are in your hands. Forgive us and draw us back into your family that's so filled with your steadfast love. O merciful God, hear our prayer. Keep watch over your people and save them from despair. Strengthen and uphold when trouble comes. Guide the rulers of this world who do not always seek your wisdom. Guide nations in the ways of peace and justice, and uphold the oppressed, even as we work and wait for your coming realm. Saving God, hear our prayer. And God of healing and comfort, pain and loss are all around, but we pray that you soothe the frantic, embolden the fearful, ease the suffering of the sick and the broken and the depressed. Give peace to all who grieve and hope to those facing death. And even when we cannot find voice from our hidden cares, we turn to you. Hear our voices, hear our silent prayers, hear all of our thanksgivings and our requests and our concerns. We pray this, O loving God, and trust in your sustaining Spirit, your Son's interceding and confidence in the realm of peace. In his name we pray. Amen.
This table is for all Christians who wish to share in the presence of Christ and in the communion of all God's people. Let us pray. Gracious God, bless this bread, bless this fruit of the vine, and bless us, that we may have our eyes opened so that we can share in seeing your presence in our midst, in one another, and in your world. Come, for all is ready. On the night that Jesus was betrayed and deserted, he brought his disciples together for one last meal. He took the bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, and he gave it to them, saying, "Take and eat, each of you, for this is my body broken for you."
same way, after they had eaten, Jesus took the cup. He poured it out for them, saying, "This is the cup of the new covenant. This is my blood, which is shed for you for the forgiveness of sins. Whenever you drink of this, do so in remembrance of me." Blood of our Lord Jesus Christ shed for you, take and drink. Let's pray our Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Now may God Almighty, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer be with you all, and may we all find unity in what binds us to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.